Okay, this is surprising. This kind of upsets the Harbor Freight grinder hierarchy. Harbor Freight keeps releasing new tools, and this one is pretty interesting. This is a Bauer branded grinder, and it has one major difference from all the other Harbor Freight grinders. It has a trigger switch. This grinder retails for $40. After using a coupon, I paid 36 bucks. I'm going to test this grinder, and I'll also tear it apart. And we'll compare this to two other grinders I tore apart recently on the channel, the $10 Harbor Freight grinder and the $20 Black & Decker. We're going to find out if this new Bauer grinder is worth your hard-earned money. Overall, there's not much to say about the test because this 8-amp grinder did really well. I really pushed it and it had no problem cutting this angle iron. If you remember, the cheap $10 grinder stalled and overheated on this test. Right off the bat here, I see some things on this grinder I like. For example, this quick adjust guard. You adjust it by loosening the lever, move the guard, and tighten the lever back into place. This is the guard off the $10 Harbor Freight grinder. You can see you have to use a screwdriver there to adjust it, so this one is way easier. When it comes to the handle here, this is about mid-range of what we've seen on past grinders. It's beefier than some of the really cheap ones, but it doesn't have the rubbery overmolding that we've seen on some more expensive grinders. Next up is the power cord, and we'll start with the cord protector boot. This is a nice beefy one. It helps keep the cord from really sharply kinking over, which can damage it. It is significantly better than on the $20 Black & Decker grinder that I tore apart in another video. You can see there the Bauer one is much more sizable. Next up, the power cord itself. We can see the label here. This is an 18 gauge cord, and it is SJ. That SJ means this is thermoset rubber, which is a more expensive, better material than we see on some other grinders. For example, the Black & Decker grinder here, where is that marked? Yep, there it is, SJT on the Black & Decker. This is thermoplastic, probably something like PVC. So compared to the Black & Decker, the cord here on the Bauer will be more flexible in low temperatures and just tougher in some ways. So this is a nice material on this power cord. And it's also super long. I measured it, and the cord on the Bauer is 8.5 feet, which is really long, and I like that. The cord here on the Black & Decker is about 6 feet. The box for this grinder touts that it has easily replaceable brushes. You can get at them through this little access panel here. However, this grinder does not come with any replacement brushes. Some other Harbor Freight grinders come with an extra set of brushes in the box. The brush holder here is decently beefy stamped brass. On some of the cheaper grinders we've torn apart, they would either be stamped steel or they would be brass, but it would be so flimsy that just removing and reinstalling the brush was enough to deform it. This one has plenty of material, so that won't happen here. It also has this wound flat spring, which is a nice feature. That keeps good consistent pressure on the brush as it wears. It also allows you to get a taller brush than we would see on some of the other grinders I've torn apart. I do see something here that this grinder is missing. It does have this heat shrink tubing on the spade connector for a little bit of reinforcement. That is good. However, some other grinders we've torn apart had an extra layer of sheathing here for some reinforcement and protection on the wire going up to the brush. We don't see that on this one. Once I remove these screws, we can pull off the gear case and really get into this thing. Taking a look at the rotors or armatures, this is the new Bauer grinder. This is the Harbor Freight $10 grinder, which you can see I burned up in a past video. And this is the Black & Decker grinder. Right off the bat, we see some nice additional details here on the Harbor Freight Bauer. This blue is epoxy, which is reinforcing the connection between the windings here and the commutator. That is a place where vibration can break that connection and cause a failure. This reinforcement with epoxy helps prevent that from happening. This lacing is here for the same reason. They bind the windings in this, then they dip the whole rotor in resin, and that again helps reinforce everything. On the other grinders here, they did dip both the rotors in resin, but you can see they skipped these other details, and these are the type of things that they could have eliminated on the new Bauer grinder if they wanted to cut costs. We can also see the laminations are cleanly cut and stacked. There are balancing marks here. I noticed this was pretty smooth when I was using it. So overall, this rotor looks really good. Let's take a look at the bearings here. Bearings are so critical on grinders because they're spinning at thousands of RPM. It's kind of a mixed bag here on the Bauer. We have a sealed bearing, which is good. You're always producing abrasive dust with grinders, so you want a sealed bearing. That will help keep that dust out of the bearing, which could wear the bearing out. The bearing brand on this is C&U, which claims to be the largest bearing manufacturer in China. They're not quite up to the level of like CW Bearing, another Chinese company, and this is definitely not a name brand like an SKF or an NSK or something, but it's definitely better to see this than a completely generic bearing. The $10 Harbor Freight here has a mix of shielded and sealed bearings. The bearing brand on this is KG International, which is okay, but this is only a shielded bearing, so that creates an entry point for that abrasive dust. There is a sealed bearing up here on the front of the armature though. On the Black & Decker grinder, it uses all sealed bearings, which is good to see, but they're no-name bearings. Taking a look in the gear cases here, and we can see both the $10 Harbor Freight and the Black & Decker use cheap axle grease type lubricant here in the gear case. There's something better on the Harbor Freight. It feels like it's either something lithium based or something fully synthetic, similar to Super Lube brand synthetic lube. But either way, they stepped up to a nicer material here than on these other two. It's a little hard to show here, but this uses a needle bearing to support the shaft that goes through the main gear. That is good to see. That's skipped on some other grinders. I don't see a brand name on that bearing. The $10 Harbor Freight grinder also uses a needle bearing. The Black & Decker here just uses a bushing. The gear case here is a cast material, probably aluminum. Then there's some machine work done and it's painted. And the quality of the casting and machine work is good. It's not the best I've seen, but it's far from the worst. If you look around like these air vents here, it's pretty cleanly cast. Same up here on the top. When you get into some of the cheaper tools, you can see it's just rougher here around these openings. It's not as precisely done. These are the crown gears out of all three of these. There's not a significant difference in hardness between them. I hit them all with a file, but there is a difference in the quality of the machine work. This is the Bauer. There's some grease on here, so it might be a little hard to see, but the machining marks are very fine, very clean, and very consistent. Compare that to the Harbor Freight here, and the machining marks are a lot cruder and not nearly as nicely done. Just see it's rougher here, not as consistent, and you have this extra material here around the holes where they weren't machined very cleanly. Back to the Bauer here, and nothing like that. The machine work looks quite good. The Black & Decker is kind of somewhere in the middle. Not as nice as the Bauer, but better than the Harbor Freight. Moving on to the body of the grinder here, and the hits just keep on coming. This is the good stuff. PA6 GF30, so nylon with 30% glass fibers, and they used plenty of it. The body of this is nice and substantial and stiff, and when we take a look inside at the field windings, they also have been epoxied for reinforcement. This is a detail skipped on a lot of grinders. For example, the Black & Decker here, you can see no epoxy there. I grabbed the brushes out of all three. This is the Bauer, this is the Black & Decker, and this little guy is the $10 Harbor Freight grinder. You can see there you get a lot less brush on the $10 grinder than you do on either of the others. Comparing the Bauer and the Black & Decker here, they're very similar in size and they're pretty similar in hardness. It feels like the Black & Decker might be a little bit harder. The Bauer is kind of in the middle as far as brush hardness goes. It's not the hardest one I've ever had, but it's not the softest one that's going to wear out super quick either. Heading down the line here to the power switch. There are some good things. It has a pretty decent action, a little on the stiff side, and it has the power leads held in with screws, which I like. but there's no brand name on here that I can see. Searching through these part numbers didn't turn up any brand names, so this doesn't appear to be a name brand switch, and that's a little bit of a difference from the Hercules grinder, which did have a name brand switch. I'm trying to get this crown gear off of here so we can see the bearing under there. I removed this clip and it doesn't want to come off. We'll see if I can get it off here without damaging anything. I can't get it all the way off, but I can see what I wanted to see. See that blue down inside there? That is the seal, because we have, again, a sealed bearing. And when I looked very close, I could see it's the same brand C and U bearing. Now let's talk about why I think the trigger design on this Bauer grinder is better than a standard grinder. So the Black & Decker switch here, like a lot of grinders, you push it forward to turn the grinder on, and it stays on till you hit the switch to turn it off. So this is better because of ergonomics and safety. The grinder is running when you're holding the switch, so if you're a butterfingers and you drop it or it gets knocked out of your hand, you let go of the switch and it turns off. But there are some drawbacks here. The rat tail design does make the grinder a little bit longer than your typical grinder, so you can't get it into super confined spaces where you might be able to fit this Black & Decker. Another thing I noticed is this lock-on button sticks up a decent bit from the handle here. The way this works is you can press it down and it will lock the switch on there till you hit the switch again. And there was once or twice where I accidentally hit it and locked the grinder on when I didn't mean to. To me, this is now the Harbor Freight grinder to get. It has build quality almost as good as the Hercules grinder I tore apart before, but it has this safer trigger switch design. I personally think there's a lot of value here. This is made in China, but it's made quite well, and they did not skip the little details they could have skipped to save money. It's kind of a personal preference whether you prefer the trigger switch design on this or the paddle switch design you can get on some other grinders. So what do you think? Would you buy this grinder? Let me know in the comments down below. And while you're down there, hit that like button and that subscribe button. Thanks for watching.